Hi guys, are you thinking about buying your first firearm or adding a new one to your collection? Here's some thoughts on caliber choices that might make your decision a little easier. Let's start here with some pistol rounds. Basically, we have a 22 long rifle, a 9mm, 45 ACP, and 45 Long Colt. The 22 is, in my opinion, the best starting point if you are looking for a handgun or a rifle. It's the easiest round to shoot as far as recoil goes. It's very inexpensive, widely available, and just all around a lot of fun. It'll help you develop the proper firearm safety and marksmanship skills that'll transfer to anything else that you see here or any other firearm. The next step up, and probably the most favored handgun round at the time, is the 9mm, also referred to as 9mm Luger, 9x19. Primarily, this is favored because of its cost, its ease of shooting, its availability, and ballistic performance. This is a round that has been adopted by most militaries, law enforcement offices. It's just a good all-around cartridge. A bigger step up from that, and one of the more famous cartridges, is the 45 ACP. This is, in my opinion, a bad starting point for anyone. It just doesn't handle. You actually have to have, I would say, a little bit more skill to properly utilize this. Your grip, your marksmanship, everything else needs to be a little bit higher standard to use effectively than something like a 9mm, and definitely the 22. The next step up from that, I won't say next step, there's a big leap here. This is the 45 Colt, 45 Long Colt is what it's commonly referred to. This was actually developed as a military cartridge that could be used in a revolver and a lever action rifle. And I actually use this in a lever action rifle. This is a hand load. This is an absolute horrible starting cartridge for anyone in handguns. It's obscure, and so it's more expensive, harder to find, definitely much bigger recoil than any of these others. And I would stick to, in particular for your very first firearm or your first couple in a category, I would stick to the widely available, less expensive rounds, unless you have a very specific need for something else. These all work in semi-automatic weapons. This will also work in a revolver. I think there are some adapters for like a 9mm in a revolver, but this is strictly a revolver cartridge. And like I said, I actually use this in a lever action rifle. When you get over to rifles, this is where things really change. Here primarily with handguns, you have semi-automatic and you have your revolver. There's some single shots as well. Rifles are really geared to a specific purpose, and that is generally based on the type of game you are hunting, or if it is a defensive military style, or specifically a target competition type firearm. My overall recommendation for someone getting into firearms for the first time would be to use a 22 rifle. It is one of the easiest and most fun things to shoot, and very inexpensive. Anybody can do it. I started when I was about 8 years old with a 22 rifle and absolutely loved it. 22 long rifle has limited applications for small game hunting. Probably things along the like rabbits and squirrels would be good for that. A step up is what's known as the 22 Mag, 22 WRM. This isn't that much different firing than the 22 long rifle, and anybody could start with the 22 Magnum. The problem is the cost. This is significantly more than the 22 comparison, and you're going to get a little bit more range, a little bit more power, a little bit better small game performance, but it's really not that much. 22 mag, while could be a great starting point, I feel its main shortcoming is it's less available and it's more expensive. You're better off with just the 22 long rifle for starting out, target shooting, plinking, and stuff like that. If you specifically want a 22 caliber hunting round in a rimfire, then the 22 mag makes sense. A jump up from these that are still actually 22 calibers is the 222. Now this is a centerfire cartridge, and the triple deuce is very, very accurate tack driver, but it's extremely obscure. This was a very, very good cartridge, and then something happened that came out with the 223, which ended up being the 5.56 Nato Round. And this, you can look at them close together. There's not much difference in appearance. The 223 5.56 is a little bit longer. This one holds a little bit more propellant and can fire a heavier projectile. What's happened is, because of this being adopted as a military round, it has become very commonplace. The 222 is almost vanished into obscurity. I'm not even sure who makes rifles for this cartridge anymore. The rifle that I have is from the 60s. So getting into rifles, aside from the rimfire cartridges, the 223 5.56 is a nice round for target shooting, some small game hunting. It is legal in some places for big game hunting. The 223 5.56 has limited applications in big game hunting. It's rather controversial, but with the proper bullet and proper shot placement, it should be effective on smaller white-tailed deer and things smaller than that. A lot of states have strict regulations on the minimum caliber size that's allowed for hunting certain game animals. And in most places, the 223 is not allowed for animals such as elk, moose, big, heavy game. That's when you get into the larger cartridges. When I moved to Colorado, I was looking for a single rifle cartridge to hunt every game there was here, and also have the possibility to hunt everything else in North America. And I chose a relatively new cartridge. This is the 300 Remington Ultra Mag. Now, this was being hyped at the time because it was new, and they were pushing these new Ultra Mags and everything else. I found an affordable Savage rifle, incredibly accurate cartridge, a lot of variability if you hand load, flat shooting, tons of power. This was the cartridge I was convinced on. The big problem is it never became very popular. It really isn't that much better in hunting performance than, say, a 30-06. So it just never really took off. And I ended up doing hand loads and stuff like that with it to get better bullets, a little bit better performance. The problem is this costs dollars to shoot. These cost pennies to shoot. And so basically, firing 3 of these, I can easily buy 100 of those. And what do you think's going to happen? You're not going to shoot a lot of this round. The 30-06 is considerably less expensive and has much more available off-the-shelf ammunition. If I was to advise anybody looking for one rifle to hunt everything from like varmints all the way up to moose in North America, I would say the 30-06 is your best off-the-shelf caliber. There's so many bullet choices you can get, so many variations in ammunition. Some of them have reduced recoil, and not this thing kicks like a mule. This definitely has a huge recoil impulse. The 30-06 is a heavy caliber as well. It's a little bit less than this, but still considerable. When you use some managed recoil rounds, a heavier rifle, and stuff like that, it reduces it quite a bit. This is not a cartridge you're going to spend a lot of time shooting. So you would need another rifle to train and hope that you didn't develop a flinch for a heavier cartridge. So generally, I strongly recommend people staying away from heavy magnum calibers as their first hunting rifle cartridge. I would look at like a 30-06, a 308, if you're doing things, elk size, maybe a 7mm .8 for lower recoil, closer shooting, 270. If you are only doing like white-tailed deer or something, the 243 is a great cartridge to look at. So basically, my experience here, what I would suggest, 22 and 9mm are good things to look at when you're looking for a pistol. If you want to start with a rifle, the 22 long rifle or the 223 5.56 NATO are good starting rounds. This doesn't really get you for hunting purposes, but for target shooting, learning to shoot, maybe some small game varmints, they'll work well for that. If you are really looking for a hunting rifle, it's going to depend on what type of animals you are hunting. Black cats should not be targets of your firearm for any reason whatsoever. So basically, hunting choices, you need to look at the type of game you're shooting, what your local regulations are, what states you plan to hunt in, if you plan to hunt in more than one, and find out what's legal. I would stay away from 223 as your primary choice for big game hunting, because you're going to find severe restrictions in a lot of states where that's not allowed. 243 is generally the minimum. It is in most places in the West for elk and mule deer and stuff. So if recoil is a huge problem for you, 243 7mm .8 are ones to look at. So these are just some ideas. And, the big thing I have found throughout, my 40 years of shooting is cost is a factor. And when you're over $3 a round for something like this versus pennies for something like this, they both go boom, they both poke holes in paper. You just, the cost makes a difference. If you want to shoot longer range, the 22 is not a good long range cartridge. This actually is a really good long range cartridge, but the 223 actually will get you out quite a ways. Some people actually shoot 1,000 yards with that and steel. So it's capable of doing that type of shooting for fun. Just some ideas to think of when you're starting out. Hope this was somewhat helpful to you if you're looking for a new cartridge or starting to look at your first firearm. But do yourself a huge favor, and anyone you're looking at, try to get a chance to shoot it. Either if you rent it at a range or if you find a friend or somebody that has one of these cartridges, get a chance to try it out to see if you really like it at all. This most people wouldn't like. This is very easy for pretty much anybody to shoot. 22, anyone can shoot that. These are not ideal. You'll find the 9mm generally much more comfortable than a 45. And look at what type of firearms are actually available in the cartridges and how much the ammunition costs and where you can source it. I can tell you with the current situation in the world of the pandemic and the civil unrest and stuff like that, when there's runs on ammunition, the ones that are widely recommended are the ones that disappear the fastest. These guys right here, 22 long rifle, 9mm, and the 223 5.56 are very difficult to come by when there is a run of ammunition. 45 can also disappear in that pretty quickly. So there is an argument for having something a little less common as a backup when you cannot get ammunition for your primary weapons if you don't stockpile. And generally, in a normal functioning world, you don't need to stockpile a ton of ammunition. But when things get crazy, it all disappears quickly. And if you wanted to go target shoot or hunting or something like that, you might be out of luck unless you can reload yourself. And reloading is good when you're into obscure cartridges, if you're doing massive amounts of ammunition, or you want very specific bullets for your hunting rifles that you can't buy off of the shelf. But generally speaking, hand loading isn't going to save you a ton of money. There's certain cartridges that it does, but you can't do rimfire. 9mm would be very hard to save a bunch of money doing, because generally you're going to try producing better ammunition than you can buy off the shelf. I can definitely reduce the cost of ammunition for a cartridge like this, but the 222, no, I'm just creating a better round than what I could buy off the shelf, and it'd probably be the same with a 223 or 5.56. So there you have it. A little bit to consider before you select your first firearm or your next one. Thanks for watching. See you again.